There we go. Thank you so much for coming and welcome to Flexible Working Scotland's Case for Flexible Working run by Lynn Houmdi. Yeah, we're excited to kind of just get going and get Lynn's wisdom on the floor. Would you like to take it away, Lynn? I'll then introduce our speakers, Natalie and Sam, after you're finished.
Yep, thanks Becca, and thanks Jane and Jen and the collective ESEN, and Social Enterprise Scotland for having me, and thanks for coming along. I've got some slides to share, so it's absolutely fine if you're off camera because I won't be able to see you anyway. If you've got any questions, maybe just keep them for the end, or you can stick them in the chat if you think you might forget them. And we can loop back round once I've finished. So I'm just going to get my slides up. Just give me a couple of seconds. As Becca mentioned, I'm Lynn Houmdi. I am the founder of Flexible Working Scotland, which is a baby social enterprise. I'm in the process of constituting. And Flexible Working Scotland is a community of over 23,000 people looking to work and or recruit flexibly and advocate for greater flexibility and equality at work. I started that community in April 2021, and we've grown incredibly. I actually modelled it on a couple of communities that exist on Facebook that are UK-wide, but inevitably are quite Southeast England-centric. And I thought, well, if I get a tenth of the size of them, I'll be doing okay. But actually, our 23,000 members are a third of the size of the larger of those two communities. So there's a massive demand for flexible working in Scotland. I'm also the co-creator of Making Work Work and a senior manager at the Challenges Group, which is a group of social businesses. Making Work Work is an award-winning suite of programmes which has directly supported 365 women in Scotland to overcome their career breaks and transition into meaningful work. And I'm also Scotland's Flex Influencer, thanks to Flexibility Works, another brilliant social enterprise. And today I'm going to be, if my voice holds out, I'm going to be talking about the benefits of flexible working for your social enterprises as underpinned by empirical evidence, not anecdata. That's a word I came across recently, and I just love it. I think we've seen a lot of anecdata around flexible working in the last few months, particularly since the end of the pandemic, as a lot of very senior people have been saying, well, I just feel that my staff are more productive when I can see them 5 days a week. And I don't really think that that's really evidence-based. So I'll be sharing a lot of evidence today. And then following that, I'm going to be presenting the Flexible Working Scotland Jobs Board and talking about how that might support your business to be inclusive, sustainable and impactful. But before I do all of that, maybe a quick definition is called for. So when I'm talking about flexible working, what I mean is any deviation from the Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 fixed location norm of working that was really common before the pandemic. And I often talk about work that works, because if people can work in a way that works for them, that obviously is beneficial to them and to their families, but it's also beneficial to their employer and the broader economy. And flexible working is not just for parents, although I think we talk a lot about parents and particularly mums in relation to flexible working. But there are plenty of people for whom that kind of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 norm just doesn't really work and doesn't enable them to contribute their best work for their employer. So when we're talking about flexible working, we need to be thinking about three kind of parameters: the when, the where, and the how. And a lot of the media coverage of flexible working is really focused on the where, and we've got really hung up about hybrid and remote working. But in actual fact, there's lots of different ways to flex. And the when is often also really important to people. And so that the when is really talking about maybe part-time days or part-time weeks. Some organisations might operate a flexi-time system or have core hours when their staff need to work, but they have flexibility around that. Some people find that compressed hours work for them, or potentially a 4-day week. Annualised hours can be really attractive, although not always particularly easy to implement, depending on the kind of work that you need doing. I find a lot of mums in particular looking for term time work in my community, and it's really hard to find outside of a sort of school or an academic setting. But that's really a reflection on the lack of affordable and accessible childcare that's out there, that kind of obliges people to look for work when their children are taken care of. And for some people, a flexible start or finish time is really all they need. And really, it's about giving people a bit more autonomy over how and when they contribute their best work. And there are some mechanisms that you might want to use to do that. For example, in the how column, I've written shift swaps. Now, most people who do shift work know that it's shift work. They know that they're not going to be able to turn up when they like and go home when they like. But if people can have a little bit of wriggle room around swapping with a colleague, that gives them a sense that their employer really understands what's going on for them in their lives. 0 hours contracts get a lot of bad reputation, often justifiably, but for some people that's perfect. Some people are more available when your business is busy and less available when it isn't. I mean, I'm thinking about the kind of seasonal work and potentially students. For some people, a fixed term contract is ideal. They can kind of go at a piece of work, and when it's done, it's done. A lot of the women returners that I work with are really attracted to the idea of a job share, but I appreciate that it can be quite difficult to implement from an employer's perspective, particularly if both halves of the job share are kind of unknown quantities. Some people will look to use leave arrangements like parental leave to bridge those gaps when they need a bit more time for whatever's going on outside of life, like school holidays. And some businesses are moving to more of an outputs-based model. And that can be quite tricky because it's about measuring what people achieve rather than the time they spend working. But there may be some examples in the work that you do where that's entirely appropriate. For example, we often think of that in relation to freelance contracts where we say, right, you need to deliver X number of whatever it is, workshops, interactions with beneficiaries, whatever it might be, over this period, and for that you get this amount of money. So there's lots of different ways to think about flexible working, and there are literally hundreds of options because all of these can be combined with each other. But essentially it's about when, where and how people can contribute their best work to your enterprise. And most people don't want to be doing that from a beach in Bali on a laptop. They just want to be able to manage their work-life blend in a way that makes working possible and it doesn't leave them really stressed at the end of the week. And it might surprise you to know that in fact 2 in 5 people of working age in Scotland can't work at all without flexibility. So that's not that flexibilities are nice to have. It means if they can't get the flexibility they need, they cannot do the job. And these people are often excluded for that reason. And many of them will be parents, carers, disabled individuals, people managing health conditions, or people who are neurodivergent. And so by not offering flexibility, employers risk excluding those people. And the irony is that 85% of the Scottish workforce have or want flexibility, but only 30% of vacancies even even mention it. And so that means there's this massive gap between the people who are doing flexible working and the mentions of it in job ads. And even when it is mentioned in a job vacancy, often it'll say open to flexible working, and candidates don't know what that means. If a candidate is looking at a full-time job and it says open to flexible working, they don't know if that means hybrid and there's going to be mandated days in the office, or if it means, well, we're looking for somebody full time, but you could probably do it in 4 days. And so people won't apply because they don't know when to have that conversation. They, in my Facebook community, all the time, people are asking, when do I ask what flexibility is available? Because they feel that if they phone up and say, oh, I've seen this job advertised and I could do it, but I need to do it within these parameters, then that might count against them and they might not get to interview. But they don't want to leave it until the interview, because obviously you've been through a lot of effort as an employer and as a candidate by that point. And then if in the interview or even at the job offer stage they say, but I can only do it on these days, really frustrating if that's not doable. So when I look back at the end of this presentation to the Flexible Working Scotland Jobs Board, I'll talk about how we're going to address some of these challenges. But first of all, now we've got some key statistics out of the way, I'm going to talk about 8 different benefits of flexible working to your social enterprises. Now, the first 4, it won't surprise you, are exactly about that people piece. But there's also a piece around living your values, around saving money, and also about procurement and compliance. So I'm going to kick off with the benefits around people. So first of all, as I've mentioned already, flexible working can be a real tool in helping you to attract and recruit the talent that you need for your social enterprise. You have the potential by offering flexible working to recruit from a broader pool, both in terms of the skills that you need, but also in terms of the geography that you're recruiting from. If you're able to offer remote or hybrid working, you can attract people who live a bit further away from your offices, for example, than a daily commute would maybe allow for. But offering flexible working has also been shown to strengthen the employer brand. So for 77% of employees, flexible working is more important than a pay rise when they're looking for a new job. Because if they need that flexibility, that is the overriding criterion for them. And this is all against the backdrop of 25% of Scottish businesses reporting staff shortages. So if you're short of staff, it's maybe a good opportunity to think about how you present flexible working and whether it's an option for people joining your enterprise. Secondly, once you've got people, you want to hang on to them. And depending on the role, the cost of replacing a single employee in the UK can be literally tens of thousands of pounds. But the loss of somebody who understands your business, your clients, your beneficiaries, your systems, your processes, your culture, that's almost immeasurable. So you want to hang on to people once you've got them. And a CIPD study last year found that 45% of workers would accept a lower salary to keep their flexible working arrangements. Now, I would argue they shouldn't have to have a lower salary because being able to work flexibly will enable them to contribute good work. But that gives a demonstration of how important flexibility is to a lot of people. And people leave when there's a lack of flexibility. So this 80,000 figure here is specific to Scotland and specific to last year. And I think that really reflects a lot of people who changed their lifestyle on the back of some of the working patterns that they managed to achieve during the pandemic. And then when people were called back to the office, as has happened a lot in the private sector, they just couldn't sustain it. So they had to leave. But businesses see retention due to flexibility. So 75% of Scottish businesses in some research done by Flexibility Works that was published at the start of this year found that flexibility helped retention. So it's a really important tool, not just to get people in, but to hang on to them. And once you're hanging on to them, you hope that they're going to be productive. And this is also borne out by evidence. So Again, in that study by Flexibility Works, 68% of Scottish businesses said that flexibility maintained productivity. And the same percentage said it made staff go above and beyond, because people understand that offering flexibility involves trust. And when they feel they are trusted and they feel that their employer understands them, they will go the extra mile. And 65% of employers said that offering flexible working even increased productivity. And hybrid working, which gets a lot of press coverage these days, is also productive. So Nick Bloom, who's a British academic based at Stanford University in the US, found that staff who work from home 2 days a week are just as productive as those who are in the office all the time. And it just gives people a bit of wriggle room, as I'm sure many of you will know. I saw that a couple of our colleagues were dialing in from home today. So it just gives people perhaps a bit more time back because they're not commuting, or an opportunity to get something done in their lunch break that they wouldn't be able to do if they were at their place of work. The fifth benefit, so moving away from your people, the fifth benefit is around cost savings. And of course, budgets in our sector are always super tight. And I know that there are many third sector organisations and social enterprises across Scotland who have already given up their physical footprint as a means to save costs. So offering remote working, even if it's only for part of the time, reduces the need for desk space. But flexible working savings go beyond that kind of physical footprint of your premises, because employers who offer flexible working, according to a study by Business in the Community, could see a gain worth up to 20% of their annual payroll costs through reduced overheads, reduced absences, and employee costs. I'm sorry, I think I've just missed a slide. Sorry. I forgot to talk about happy, healthy staff. I'm sorry. Just to go backwards into the people. So once your staff are productive and they're happy with their role, they'll also be healthier. So flexible working enables staff to balance work and life. And I would argue that work is part of life. They're not like two different things on a set of scales, and when one goes up, the other goes down. And if they feel that they're achieving that balance, it leads to lower stress, lower sickness, and lower absenteeism, which is all good for their employers. And when I was researching this presentation, I found that the benefits even extend to heart health. So if people find a way to mitigate the stress of work with the stress of that work-life blend, it can lead to better heart health and a reduction in the risk of cardiovascular disease, which is remarkable, especially against the backdrop of 4.4 days lost on average per worker in the UK due to ill health. So we want our staff to be healthy, we want their well-being to be facilitated through their work. Sorry for missing that slide. So I've spoken already about the cost savings, but and so as I was saying at the end of this slide, if you can offer flexible working, it's not only saving you money in terms of your footprint or your overheads, it's also saving money in terms of absences and other employee costs. But importantly to our sector, offering flexible working enables us to demonstrate our values. It really enables us to walk the talk when it comes to people and planet. And so in terms of our social aims, and our commitment to people, as I mentioned, 2 in 5 Scottish workers need flexibility. And examples that I've collected together here include 2 in 5 carers who've had to turn down a job or a promotion due to caring. Around a third of mums say that flexibility is the difference between working or not working. And so, you know, if our beneficiaries are particular groups of people, we want to be treating our staff with the same care and attention as we treat our beneficiaries. 68% of Scottish employers said that flexible working helps them have a more diverse workforce. And there's a lot of research out there to suggest that greater diversity of thought in our organisations means for better decision making and better impact. And also your organisations may have accreditations which highlight your values and which you have spent time and effort and potentially money signing up to in order to attract a particular kind of candidate and to strengthen your employer brand. And these might include things like carer positive, disability confident, working families. Flexibility Works are developing a new accreditation for Scotland. There are literally dozens out there. But if you have these accreditations, then flexible working can be a way to attract the candidates that you have made a commitment to supporting. And something interesting around people that I found in my research is that there are certain groups of people who might find dominant workplace cultures quite uncomfortable. For example, people who are in a minority, such as people from minority ethnic communities or people from LGBTQ plus communities. And for those people, some research in the US has suggested that by not being in the workplace all of the time, it gives them a bit of respite from microaggressions, from potentially uncomfortable conversations and discussions, and just enables them to support their own well-being by working from home some of the time. So it's not just the sort of obvious candidates that we might be trying to attract with flexible working, but there's a really wide range of people who benefit from thinking about their working pattern in a slightly different way. And it's not just about people, it's also about planet. So there are environmental benefits to offering flexible working, particularly remote or hybrid working, which reduces the need for commuting. And so if your employees are not coming into the workplace as often as they might, they're not emitting CO2 on their journey to work, that contributes to less traffic, better air quality, and lower fossil fuel consumption if they are taking cars. And obviously, on the back of the pandemic, Zoom calls and other video calls have often replaced even flights and have enabled us to collaborate across much broader geographical areas so that we don't have to travel. And as I mentioned earlier, remote work or cutting down on the number of employees who are coming into a workplace means that an enterprise can have a lower physical footprint. And so that's a cost saving, but it also means less waste, less use of resources such as water, and a lower energy consumption for your enterprise. Now, some of that is obviously going to be displaced onto your employees, and you need to think about how you manage that. But dispersed energy usage in several homes is very likely to be less than centralised energy and resource uses, for example, in an office in a city centre. And finally, offering flexible work enables you to be, as an employer, to be part of the Fair Work framework, along with all the other aspects of fair work. And that's becoming an increasingly important part of the procurement process and the grant giving process. So many of you will know that if you've applied for grants recently, the Scottish Government, for example, is asking about your fair work compliance. And flexible working comes into all 5 elements of the Fair Work framework. For example, effective voice. In terms of flexible working, that's about employees feeling able to express the kind of working pattern that they would like and have a conversation about the flexibility that they need. Fulfillment, people are likely to feel much more fulfilled in their work if there's not a conflict between managing their work and managing their home life. Opportunity, offering flexible work can mean that people have opportunities that otherwise they wouldn't have. I mentioned the 2 in 5 statistic, but I'm also thinking about people coming back from women coming back from maternity leave, people coming back from a period of sick leave. If they can work flexibly, for example, part-time or hybrid, that might mean they can hold on to that job. And that's related to job security. As people's lives change over time, and if they have the opportunity to kind of flex with those changes, it can mean that a job is much more secure than it would be in a more rigid framework. And finally, respect. If you're able to offer flexible working to your staff, they will understand that as an employer, you respect that they have commitments outside of work that are really important to them, and that you are enabling them to fulfill. So that is a big incentive, particularly if your organisation is looking for grants from Scottish Government, or you're part of that public procurement supply chain. Then using flexible working as part of that broader Fair Work framework is going to give you something really tangible that you can talk about in your bids and your grant applications. So that was it on the benefits, but I just want to talk briefly before I finish about flexible working and about the jobs board, which I have launched. So just as a quick recap, the membership of Flexible Working Scotland is over 23,000 people, and it's 92% women. So there are lots of mums and carers, but also disabled and neurodivergent individuals and people who are just looking for something other than full-time 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And 85% of members are looking to find or sustain flexible work, and they are not finding one single location in which they can find jobs. And of those looking for flexible work, there are some barriers are mentioned here. So lack of flexible jobs or lack of flexible jobs in a particular sector. There are flexible opportunities in every sector, but often it's quite patchy. People talk about their external commitments or a particular change in circumstances. So the job they were doing before is no longer possible because their circumstances have changed. And we see this a lot in women who become mothers or carers. The jobs they were previously doing very full on. They might have been very intensive jobs that consumed a lot of hours or involved a lot of travel, and they're just not able to do those jobs anymore. And more to the benefit of social enterprises in the third sector, to be honest, because often women particularly who've done very full-on jobs are looking for something where they can give something back, and they're looking for something part-time or flexible. And I think our sector is really well placed to capitalise on that talent. And I see that a lot from the women who go through making work. But for these individuals, as I alluded to earlier, because some people can't work at all without the flexibility, salary, job title and sector are much less important to them than perhaps they were earlier in their career or at another point in their life. And what is really important to them is the flexibility that is on offer and the workplace culture, because typically people who need flexibility need it for a reason, and that reason is really important to them. It might be because they're parents or carers or managing a health condition. And so they want to know that they can be their authentic self at work. They want to know that they're going into a workplace culture where they can thrive and not just survive. And so being able to see workplaces that are going to support them and accommodate them in order to get the best work out of them, not just for altruistic motivations, is really important to them. And when flexibility isn't mentioned, or it's only vaguely mentioned, it really puts people off. So, for example, more than a quarter, so 28% of parents were put off applying for new roles if no flexibility was mentioned. So it's really, really important to large numbers of candidates. And so what the Flexible Working Scotland Jobs Board is trying to do is to support work that works. And I've been trying to do this for the last almost 5 years through the Facebook community, but Facebook is very limited in terms of delivering social change. The jobs are not searchable or filterable, and as we probably all know, if we use social media, the algorithm kind of shows us what it thinks we want to see and not necessarily what we want to see. And I think there are some ethical issues around social media that I'm personally trying to work through, and it's a bit of a necessary evil, I think. But what I'm trying to do with the Flexible Working Scotland Jobs Board is create a space where forward-thinking employers can meet flexible and diverse talent in a way that's not mediated by social media. And so the board will enable employers to access a pool of diverse quality talent by publicising their flexible working offering and promoting their accreditations. And on the candidate side, candidates will be able to filter according to the type of flexibility they need and identify employers who specifically support their values, lived experience and circumstances. And the Flexible Working Scotland Jobs Board exists. It's in beta and it's open for employers to post jobs and test it out. And I would really welcome employers to give it a go. The key points of differentiation from the other jobs boards out there are a granular level of flexibility. So when posting a job, employers will need to indicate what flexibility is available. Salary transparency, so all roles will show the salary. We know that a lack of transparency discriminates against certain groups and penalises certain groups. And it also enables people to understand whether the job is pitched at their level. And employers will be able to post their accreditations as a proxy for their culture. So, for example, if you are carer positive accredited, then that will give carers a good indication that you're willing to support them and you want to support them. So the Flexible Working Scotland Facebook community has already been matching employers with talent. There's one testimonial here on the right from a social enterprise based in Dundee, who said that advertising one of our new posts as hybrid widened the field and attracted some excellent candidates who wouldn't want a daily commute. And in actual fact, they were a very definite case of quality over quantity. So they didn't have that many applicants, but apparently they could have interviewed them all and they could have offered the job to 3 or 4 of them. So that was a really successful experience, just from thinking a bit harder about the kind of flexibility they could offer. And so I'm actively seeking employer testers for the Flexible Working Scotland Jobs Board, and I'd really like you to help shape it so that it really works for employers in our sector. And in return, I'm able to offer free jobs postings for this beta period till the end of the year. I will share your vacancies into the Facebook community and to my mailing list of over 5,000 people. We're able to showcase accreditations if you have them, and the melting pot is on there just now with their real living wage accreditation. We're going to hear from Sam shortly. And if you need it, we can also play back to you some insights from the board so we can show you how many people looked at it and how many applied. And even if you aren't hiring right now, your insights are really valuable, because this is it's a software as a service solution, so it's white labeled, and so we have some opportunity to shape it to really work. So if you are interested in being part of the beta phase and being a tester, you can take a picture of the QR code on the screen, but I'll also put the link in the chat. And just before I finish off, I've also just launched a crowdfunder to get this going. So I'll also put my LinkedIn details in the chat so that anybody can connect if you'd like to continue the conversation. Thanks very much. And back over to you, Becca.
Lynn, thank you so much for sharing. That was really informative, first off. I feel like the flexible work attitude is really powerful generally, but honestly, there were layers and benefits that I had never considered. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm really excited to hear about Natalie's experience. And Natalie is the CEO of The Haven in Stonehaven, and she's going to share her experience of flexible working with The Haven. Are you unmuted?
I am about to try and share my screen. Let me know if
amazing.
it is not going to work. Fingers crossed. So, Chrome tab. Right. I'm wondering, can you see that properly?
Yes.
Great, because all I can see is a black screen. So that's good that you actually see something. So I'm not actually the CEO, I'm the manager. Our CEO, Starkeeper, she is stepping back at the end of the year as the founder. She's moving on to other things, and I've been promoted to manager, and that then also kind of opened up another role to be made available, which I'll talk about after I do the little presentation thing, because it also kind of loops back to the whole flexible working concept that we're talking about today. And we did actually use the beta phase of that as well. So I can kind of talk a little bit about the experience that we had with that as a bit of a juxtaposition as well to what is currently out there, which we used for the new role that we've got as well. So we're going to talk a bit about, we had over the summer an intern come and work for us. It was really great. It was a paid position for about 3 months, and she worked on a project that we'd sort of had lots of discussions about for feminist governance and policies for the organisation, because as just what's been talked about, the majority of social enterprises in the third sector involve women running organisations and women working in organisations. So they came up with The Haven as a careful and inclusive organisation. That's a practice brief. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty because it did get quite academic in parts. So I'm just going to give like a distillation of some of the things that the paper came up with. And this is available as like a 2-page double-sided PDF, because we wanted to come up with a report that didn't sit on the shelf somewhere. So we're hoping that in sharing this information with other organisations, that it could be, useful for others. So The Haven is a community-based wellbeing organisation in Stonehaven in Scotland. So we're in the northeast, just sort of south of Aberdeen. And it was founded in 2017 by my colleague Starkeeper, and became a registered charity in 2022. And one of the things that we always come back to is our core values, which are compassion, community, courageousness, and authenticity. And we recently had our AGM, and the 4 core values are also we've got 4 awards that we give out. So we're kind of continually looping back to these 4 things. And we really wanted to be able to have a policy and governance framework within the organisation that reflected those principles and values, to be more reflective of what we're trying to achieve. So the paper looked at that. Kat, the intern, talked to a whole heap of different groups that the Haven come into contact with, and we really wanted to come up with a body of work that helped encompass the values through a careful and inclusive lens. And
have we lost Natalie?
I think we
I'm
have.
back. If you can hear me, can you hear me? I'm back.
We can
We've
hear
got
you.
very bad. Yeah, we've got very bad internet here. So hopefully, do I have to reshare my screen with you?
I think so, yes. Yeah, but you're
Okay.
back. We can hear you, so that's good.
I can. That's small wins. Small wins. Okay. So share. Yeah, great. And we talked a lot about things through a feminist lens, and we acknowledged that that could be a concept that's quite confrontational for some people. So we reframed it as being a framework of care rather than under feminist governance, but we sort of crossed between those two terminologies. And it was hoped that this would bring about openness and sharing within the organisation, and then from that we could reflect on our own journey about where we've come to with that, and then make that useful for other organisations. So one of the main things that we've sort of looked at with it is, what are our policies, and do they reflect the fact that we are a careful and inclusive organisation, not just within ourselves but also within the wider community. So we looked at the things that make up a careful and inclusive organisation. So it was all about intention, what we offer. So we have a suite of activities, classes and workshops through our National Lottery Community Fund that are aimed at improving the health and wellbeing of those in the community. And then we also talked about careful practices, how they're delivered internally and also externally. Receiving care, because often in the third sector it's sort of a service delivery that goes one way, but how are we also being careful with ourselves internally as an organisation, as a staff, where our staff looked after, as well as our volunteers, as well as the people who use the space as co-working model. And then also careful learning. So how do we then take that forward as well, and identifying areas that we need to work on to then share them with others. So the key questions that came out of it were our policies, and this kind of then harked back to, it was sort of like really boring, dry, nitty-gritty stuff, but, you know, do our employment policies match up with being careful and inclusive? So it totally threads back to what was being talked about before. Like, a lot of women who work in the third sector are in caregiving capacities in their domestic environments. So I'm a single mum. A lot of the other people who work from here are also mums. So do our policies reflect the needs of the people that work within them? And then how can they be strengthened going into the future to reiterate on that and develop it further? And then also the people that come into the contact to the organisation externally, so the people that come and do our classes, the people that volunteer with us, the people that use the space as a co-working space, what was their experience of the organisation as well. So the research approach looked at the governance dimensions of both, not just the board, but the staff as well, and the way the volunteers were organised. And there's bits on the end of the page which were much more to do with the research side of it, which I won't go into it, but basically kind of was like a 360 look at everything internal and external and how that was conducted, which was mainly through semi-structured interviews. So the key themes that came out of that research were inclusion, connection and learning. And this is across the board, not just governance with the board and the staff, but also how we interact with the people that we serve. And the highlights that came out of that were a need for more inclusive language and tone, the importance of acknowledging intersectionality and the greater specificity required in policy documents. So we're currently in the process of working with an HR consultant to polish up those policy documents to make them more in alignment with what came out of the brief. And so the areas for the development, which also kind of harks back to what was just talked about, we need a more creative and definitive environmental and sustainability practices policy, and more development of a learning and development policy internally for the staff. And one thing that came out about it that wasn't in place was a more defined time off in leave policy, because we have a flexible working arrangement within the staff because we're only a staff of 2. So we've got enough flexibility to pivot as we need to, but we've recognised that the policy and the documentation needed to be more specifically worded to reflect that, to help safeguard both the organisation and the staff. So we wanted to avoid quality versus quantity trade-off by prioritising the depth of belonging over the expansion of participation. So we're about more deep experiences rather than lots of surface level interactions. We need to strengthen our feedback mechanisms to foster a more inclusive opportunities for learning, listening and reflection. And the third key point was seek improvement and impact. So we need to increase the involvement of individual and collective impact to address barriers to meaningful participation. So the conclusion of the project, we came with recommendations to the board for both policy and practice. So that's currently in development going into 2026 as well. So it's still a work in progress, but we feel like we've been able to evaluate and define a lot of the things that came out about it. So we're in a really interesting transitionary phase with the founder stepping away, and then also being able to develop and quantify and qualify the aims of the project going into the future. So yeah, it's a really interesting time. I will stop sharing my screen for a tick and then talk a little bit about, and that might go back to me. Hi. So with the founder stepping back and me becoming the manager, my role, which is National Lottery funded, which was the community wellbeing volunteer coordinator, then became a more redefined role, which was short term. So that role dropped back in scope, but in days as well, to a 21-hour a week position with a little bit more scope for engagement. So it's now an engagement role. And we then went to things like Facebook and LinkedIn to advertise the role. And one of the things that we found was really interesting is the amount of stuff we had to wade through to get to the good people. So I feel like a platform like the Flexible Working Jobs Board would have made that a whole lot easier, because we found that a lot of people read flexible working as remote working, which for an engagement role, I don't know how people could have seen that would have been possible. So yeah, some feedback for flexible working that, if people came to it with a better understanding of what we meant by flexible working, then we could have reached a lot more people who got it from the get-go. And it was really interesting. We also had a massive security breach from our website because we linked the job onto LinkedIn, which was something we didn't even think about. So for small organisations like ours, we really only had something like LinkedIn to go to, which really wasn't kind of like at the level that we were looking at. So something like the Flexible Working Job Board would have been much better available to small to medium scale organisations like us. So if anyone's got any other questions, maybe leave to the end, but to pass it to you guys.
Thank you so much for sharing, Natalie. I will absolutely be sharing any questions with you at the end from anyone. If anyone wants to put their hand up, they're more than welcome to ask questions at the end, just after Sam. So collect and formulate your questions. That was really fascinating, and the feminist governance feels like a topic that's really going around at the moment. I feel like something's really fostering in the energy about it. I know that I've been thinking about it. I find it fascinating and definitely
it was really interesting for us because we've got quite an equal division on the board of genders, and and it was quite confronting for some of them, and we kind of came up with this idea of, well, instead of calling it feminist governance project, because that's quite in your face, that we looked at the language around it and, you know, careful, and it was really nice that we kind of changed the wording of careful because it meant full of care rather than this sort of timid kind of dynamic of, you know, tentativeness. So yeah, it's been really interesting ground for fostering conversation and discussion around, you know, I think Starkeeper really wanted to put the scope of it as a matriescence of an organisation, and it was quite interesting because a lot of the legal and policy frameworks come from a quite a patriarchal, colonialist, extractive mindset. So it's sort of the intersection of where these two very, very different dynamics meet and what's possible with that. And, you know, I'd really like in the future to work towards like the wording of the contracts and the wording of like the templates and the policy framework to be much more indicative of that care, because, you know, they're quite one directional, quite one dimensional as well. And the wording that's used in a lot of those documents, I'd really like to play with it so it could be more reflective of the care and inclusivity that a lot of us are aiming for.
Oh, yeah, no, that sounds like an amazing kind of shift that you're making right now. And it sounds like you have a good conversation to be had with Lynn as well. I will be sharing links at the end so that you can check out Flexible Working Scotland jobs board and see kind of how that works for you. And if are you comfortable, Natalie, sharing your slides so people can take a look at what you've been working on and understand the process a bit better?
Yeah, I've provided both the slides. They're more than available, but I've provided the brief as I think it's a 2 double-page PDF, so you can get into the nitty-gritty if you want to get really kind of like academic and look at the terminology a bit more. And there's a lot more in that I didn't want to include in the slides because it's quite chunky, and you've kind of got to sit down and read it a couple of times to get a bit more of a better perspective on what it's actually talked about. So yeah, I'm more than happy. I've passed those on to be made available afterwards when the recording is made. But yeah, if anyone would like to contact us more directly, my email, I'll put my email in the chat as well if anyone's got any comments or feedback as well.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I will be in touch and do a deep dive with a highlighter. Thank you. Next up is Sam, the Business Development Manager at Melting Pot, with another unique perspective.
Thanks,
Are you
Becca.
ready to take it away? You're welcome.
That was really good. It was really interesting. And actually, my phrase of the week, I've decided I'm sticking with it. It's only Monday, but anecdata, Lynn. That was brilliant. I mean, we started off high. I think that's great because there's so much about being an employer that can become based on anecdata, and it can really guide our individual decisions that have a much bigger, sort of wider consequence than we think. So that was really interesting. Anyway, the Melting Pot is Scotland's Centre for Social Innovation. What does that mean? Social innovation for us comes down to two things, and there's lots of ways of defining it, but effectively it's the way that we see it is that change is best made in a sector agnostic way. So you work together with public, private, third and academic bodies to make real change. And that change is addressed at social and environmental problems. This is what we're passionate about. We like to see progress through social enterprises, charities, grassroots movements, etc. The second piece to social innovation is that we use and involve people who have lived experiences of the problems that we're trying to solve those problems. We believe that those are the people who are best placed to advise and inform and make change. And so much of that is relevant to flexible working. People know how they want to work. They know how they work best, given the sort of situation that they have going on at home, the tasks that they have at work. And so trusting in the people who are delivering work for you is the best way to go about it. And that's really why we adopt a flexible working model at the Melting Pot, and we sort of advocate for it more generally as well. So there's three things that I want to draw on, and I'm going to apologise, I don't have slides, you're just going to have to listen to my voice and look at my face and the CDs behind me. If you can count the CDs behind me, that would be great. It might give you something else to do. But there are three things that I'd like to draw on that sort of connect our business to the flexible working landscape. The first one is our collaborative hub. It's a co-working space on Kelton Road. This is what we were first known for in Edinburgh, one of the first co-working spaces in Scotland. So very naturally, we have freelancers, individuals who are fully remote workers, coming into our space and using it because they want to access other minds who are working in a flexible way. But they also want a place that sort of nurtures their creativity and productivity that isn't their dining room or their kitchen. So in some ways, flexible working is about having a space that suits whatever flexible working looks like to you. In other ways, it means recognizing that if you are an employer who has a remote policy, a remote working policy, there may be other mental well-being provisions that you can make, such as a membership for a co-working space, so that you're still getting the best out of your people. Because I think that's one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we get from our members who have a membership paid for by their employer, is that actually being at home isn't useful. It was to begin with, when it was all sort of unique, and then actually they needed that connection, whether it was 1 day a week or 5 days a week. So again, you're really letting people who are wanting to work flexibly choose that, the way that it works best for them, whether it's in a co-working space or whether it's at home. We also see a shift in sort of attitudes to private offices and meetings and events. So we have 2 private offices at the Melting Pot. They're both occupied at the moment. And that is a real sign of the times, actually, because there are some organisations who prefer and feel that it is useful to have a physical base, especially if they're having confidential one-to-ones with service users in the third sector. And that's absolutely perfect. They can have a confidential space in our co-working space, whilst you have freelancers and other people working at individual desks. However, you can also make the case that if you arrange like all of your meetings on a Tuesday, for example, people can be in the co-working space, they can attend their meetings, and outside of that, they can just use the flexible workspace. They can just go into the kitchen and meet other people that are not necessarily working for their company and be introduced to those new perspectives, whether it's from a public, private, third, or academic sector. And so then for us, flexible working really becomes about using spaces in a way that suits what you want to learn, what you want to achieve with the day, with the week, with the month. And that's much more than just being a co-working space. That's a shift towards, recognizing what suits us as individuals, but also as employers. There is a big saving to be made. So obviously, you look at rentals, office rentals in Edinburgh, your roof can come in, you've got electricity, you've got just ongoing overheads, core costs that actually your service users would be better off benefiting from investment in whatever sort of service it is that you deliver, instead of paying for rent. But actually coming into the Melting Pot and using spaces like ours can be really beneficial from that perspective as well. So I think the first thing I wanted to touch on was that sort of physical product that we offer. The second thing I wanted to touch on was our consultancy. So we are problem solvers. When I say that we're the Centre for Social Innovation, and when I talk about finding new ways of approaching persistent problems, the same can be said for companies who are facing a cultural issue. Maybe it's a people issue. Maybe it's something that they've sort of tried to target for quite a long time. They need a new strategy. They want to embed different behaviours in their organisation. We will go in through our consultancy and help employers to think more clearly about the problems that they're facing. So a lot of the time, that requires bringing people together and actually bringing them together in person, in a space to talk in a safe environment. But one of the things that we came across in a pilot contract earlier this year was around inclusive teams and how you hire and retain inclusive teams. And the questions that we were asking, because we have to ask questions as consultants, we have to ask questions to get you thinking. One of the first ones was, who do you want in your team? And the answers that we got were, I need a salesperson, I need a software developer, I need a manager, I just need somebody to do the admin. And then the next question was, why do you not already have them? And the answers were kind of along the same lines. Well, we've not got the money, we've not got this, we advertised here. And then it's like, oh, actually, we advertised on LinkedIn, but we didn't advertise with Flexible Working Scotland or wherever it happens to be. And that's when we started to get into the really interesting things about what prevents people from joining your team. Because it might not be that you need a salesperson. It might be that you need a mother in your staff team who actually understands what it's like to be a mother and to have that customer profile. And so actually going a little bit deeper than just, I need X staff member, I'm going to advertise it on LinkedIn, going through the accreditations that Lynn has mentioned and advertising on the Flexible Working Job Board can be really useful to get different perspectives. And again, it comes back to that process of social innovation. How do you engage lots of different perspectives to get to the solution to a problem that you're trying to solve? The last thing I want to touch on were the practices in our own team, because you can't really, you have to practice what you preach, don't you? You can't just say, it's wonderful to be flexible, but everybody, all of our staff have to be here 5 days a week, because they don't. So we have a few different measures. We have a 30-hour work week for our staff. We are a real living wage employer, which has financial implications, but we're also a flexible working employer. So we advertise all shifts for our shift-based staff more than 4 weeks in advance, but we also guarantee more than 16 hours per week for the staff members who aren't on a 30-hour-a-week contract. For our interns, we try to do the same, but it can be difficult, especially if they're coming through different international programs. Generally, we have as many kind of accreditations from the social enterprise sector as possible. So we use Welcome Brain's neurodiversity audit a few months ago to look through our job interview principles. Things like giving the questions in advance, making sure that people know how to find your building, letting people know that there's going to be movement around the room that you're interviewing them in, particularly if they're sensitive to bright lights or loud sounds or whatever it happens to be. Just taking into consideration the fact that not everybody's brain is the same and that sometimes you need those kinds of adjustments. Certainly for me, I can't imagine working a 5-day week anymore. Hopefully I never have to make that decision because it's just so useful. Many of us have freelance contracts because we work in the third sector and we need to earn a little bit of extra money. And that's just the case. We need to be able to flex around that. So being able to start other freelance work first thing this morning and then start at the melting pot at 10 o'clock because that's what works for me today is really, really useful. There's also something that is perhaps unsurprisingly useful, and that is not having to take public holidays when they actually happen. I don't really mind when people are on holiday, just take the holiday. I actually don't want to be on holiday when everybody else is off because I just would like to be on my own, up a hill somewhere rather than surrounded by tourists. But these are the sorts of things where you can ask questions and say, do we really need to do that? Do I have to see somebody in the office to trust that they're doing that job? And there are certain sort of ways and processes that you can embed in your organization to make that happen. One of them is making sure that you advertise your job on Flexible Working Jobs Board so that you actually get people who have the same sort of approach to work that you do, and that will inevitably complement the well, not complement, it might complement, but it might improve the culture and the organization that you have. I don't think there's anything else that I want to say other than, starting with flexible working practices is a great thing to do, not least when you're a social enterprise starting out. Right at the beginning, you can embed inclusivity and accessibility in your team, no matter how small you are. And that's a great thing to do, because social enterprises are going to take over the world. So we should start positively.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thanks for sharing. It's really interesting listening to yourself and Natalie and Lynn. I feel like you all have kind of come about flexible working in an interesting way, where before you might not think that you think you're being flexible for the people coming in. But really, when you're looking at flexible working, you're looking at, well, why do I want to be flexible for certain people? Why do I need these certain people? How does it work for me? And you're really thinking about nurturing yourselves, your team, your mission. You're really nurturing everything by thinking about how to nurture those individuals. It feels a lot deeper than.
And actually, that's a really interesting point, because one of the other things that I've always reflected on this since joining Melting Pot, because in my previous role, we had quite a flexible approach to work, but it was also, core hours, so 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. But you could move it with permission. You couldn't just move it because it suited you. And that wasn't a barrier, but certainly there is a balance to be struck in terms of making flexible adjustments for the person and ensuring that the work still gets done. Like, you don't have to assume that just because you let somebody work on a proposal at 10 p.m. at night, that means that it will be of a lesser standard. It might just mean that they're a night owl and that's fine. Like, you don't need to worry about that. So yeah, it's really interesting, like, balance the well-being benefits for the person, but also just make sure that the job happens and you'll be fine,
Yeah, there's something in understanding what that means to you as well, and trusting yourself and your team, and yeah, all very fascinating. Thank you, everybody. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. Is anything springing to mind? I haven't seen any questions popping into the chat. Do you want to raise a hand if you have one? Charmaine or Susan? I think we've lost a couple of people. It's an intimate group. Oh, Jennifer?
I was just searching for the wee hand there and couldn't find it. I was like, oh! Thanks, everyone. That was really fascinating to hear. First, about all the benefits of flexible working, and also the experiences of Sam and Natalie as well. And I suppose I've got a couple of points to make, but the question I've got is, so if you are looking to adopt flexible working practices, where can we get support in terms of policy development, the policies that would then accompany you sort of making that transition? Is there somewhere that we can go for help in terms of the policy templates and things like that?
I can answer that. So much as I'd love to say, come to me, I don't currently have the capacity. So I'm going to signpost you to Flexibility Works, because that is what they do day in and day out. And they have a really good framework around how to sort of implement flexible working. So I'll put the link in the chat. What I would say is, I suppose, like anything within reason, this is all predicated on good management practice. And if you don't have the solid management practice and the positive workplace culture in place, you're kind of I'm trying to think of a suitable analogy. You're potentially putting a plaster on a festering sore. You need to have the basics right. Otherwise, it's just window dressing and it's not going to be properly embedded.
Yep, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. It's really just so I can pass that information on to members. So at GSEN, I suppose I would consider us to be sort of fully flexible, both and we're a really small team as well, Natalie, so I'm sure you'll relate. So there's 2 of us that work full time, and our comms officer works 10 hours a week. Rachel and I, the 2 full-time workers, we work completely flexibly. But Sam, our comms officer, works entirely remotely from Ireland. And we put a couple of kind of accommodations in place. So every quarter, Sam pays for his flight to come back to Scotland, and we pay for his accommodation. And that allows us to keep that kind of face-to-face interaction, and just to maintain those relationships. The reason that Sam works entirely remotely was, well, he was working in Glasgow, and he had some family issues. We were desperate not to lose him. He didn't want to leave GSEN either, so we looked at different ways that we could accommodate, Sam still being able to be employed by GSEN. We've been working in that way since April, and I have to say it's worked out beautifully at the moment. Sam just needs to tell us when he's doing his 10 hours a week, so he can just pop it in his diary, and that way we know if we email him at that time, we'll get a response then. What we've also done is, when I first started at GSEN 5 years ago, we had a unit. Well, actually, we had 2 units in the Brigade. So we had a kind of working office space, and then a really small meeting space. And obviously, you can imagine we're paying for 2 units. Such a small team as well. So we moved out the Brigade. We started to share an office with our TSI partners, Volunteer Glasgow, on a kind of sub-licence base. And we had a sort of small office within their bigger office. And that reduced our rental costs by half. And now Volunteer Glasgow and GSEN have moved in the same building at Brunswick House, but just up the stairs, to an even smaller working office, because we're finding we spend less and less time actually in the office as well. So having those reduced costs, again, alluding to the benefits you were talking about, Lynn, we've kind of seen the benefit of that. But one of the things that really struck me is around trust. And from previous experience, having an employer that trusts you to do the work just makes all the difference. I'm sure most of you have experienced working for an employer who doesn't trust you for no reason, nothing that you've done wrong. It's just the kind of culture, and that never gets the best kind of out the staff. It never brings the best out of them. So yeah, trust is huge for me, and I'll be quiet now.
I think, Natalie, you have your hand up.
I'm going to unmute
Thank
and
you,
unhand myself. My question's maybe more for Lynn, but for anyone on the call today, is there, don't know if the word sweet spot, but is flexible working more resonative for an organisation of a particular size? Like our organisation, we can kind of make it up as we go along. So having a flexible workspace for just 2 members of staff is something that we can kind of like juggle with ourselves. So is the concept of flexible working more compatible with obviously the third sector and social enterprise, but of organisations of a certain size? And then if you get above that, it then becomes too many moving parts in a way. I'm just kind of wondering if there's an average type and size of organisation that flexible working works for, if that makes
sense. Shall I take that one? I don't think so. I think it's like anything. Sometimes so small is beautiful, and then as you scale, you just find a whole bunch of other challenges. I mean, there are some huge organisations that work flexibly reasonably successfully, and I mean, in Scotland, for example, the Scottish Government has a really good flexible working policy. A lot of private sector companies have really solid, flexible working. But I think the challenges they face are probably quite different to the ones that small social enterprises face. But on the flip side, they're probably better able to develop watertight policies and implement them and train their staff in them and be a bit more systematic. So I don't think the size of organisation, I think the challenges are just different depending on the size. And it's really about that culture piece, and the culture comes from the leadership. And, you know, I think the leaders need to be living the culture, not just kind of typing it up in policies and stuffing them away in a cloud drive somewhere. But, you know, I think the big problems happen when people are saying one thing and doing another. And people, you know, people don't need to all be co-located to kind of get that culture piece, but you do need to be much more intentional about how you communicate it if people are not all in the same place. And sometimes that's much easier in a smaller organization.
Thank you, Lynn. I think Charmaine, did you have your hand up?
Yes. Thank you, and thanks for everyone for sharing. So I am based in Scotland, and I work part-time for an organization called the Post-Growth Institute. So their office is physically located in America, but we work, it's an international organization. We work across 16 countries. So nobody goes into like a physical office unless they choose to like go to a space like the melting pot or so. But I think the success of working flexibly, including remotely, is around governance and relationality, that building, focusing, especially social enterprises, like focusing on the relationships. So our organization practices sociocracy, and the structure is on circles. So each specific unit operates on a circles, and there's a circle lead, and then we all report semi-autonomously to that overall governance structure. So we have like weekly meetings, weekly circle meetings, and we have monthly meetings where we discuss strategy, and also each circle gives an update of the work that they have done. So that kind of builds in the accountability. And within our circle, you would state like what you're working on, what's in terms of the overall goals of the organization, which is to explore what the world would look like post-capitalism, like what is well-being, economy, what does that mean? So we set our times that we work in terms of covering the work is on an individual basis, but the circle meetings are fixed, depending based on consent. And then we have like silent meetings. So all the circle updates, we silently reflect on it. And each time we meet, we reflect on what are we learning, what was surprising, and how can you do your work better, what support you need. So that builds in the relationship and the accountability, so that because we meet remotely, and ever so often we try to have an in-person retreat, which we were able to do that this year. So many of us have met each other for the first time in over 3 or 4 years, that we have actually physically met with each other. So that just sweetens and strengthens the relationships that we have been building over the period of months and weeks. But we also, in terms of the job, we also have a post-growth job board, and anyone can submit a job opportunity that's in alignment with the stuff that we believe in, which is like doing things for good, doing people over profit, people, planet over profit, that kind of philosophy. So I popped that link in the chat. So I just wanted to share that as part of the flexible working input that we participate in.
Thank you so
Well,
much
absolutely
for sharing.
Sorry, Becca, I just love the idea of having working circles like that, especially if you're all working remotely. Just to be able to start to build some of those relationships, and I'm sure it must have been really exciting when you were actually getting the chance to meet each other in person.
Yes. Yes, we have a newsletter where you could it spoke about our experience meeting with each other, and so it's really about that relationship building, and as you're saying, is about quality over quantity. And sometimes even if you have a job, so sometimes we, based on capacity, we close off certain activities within the circle. So like, okay, we know what capacity we have. This is our ideal, but that's the capacity we have. So we temporarily close off certain parts of the work so that, you could focus on things that you could get done, and that sense of achievement as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds really good, especially if you've got a lot of staff and they're kind of the same as you guys, sort of geographically disparate and all working remotely. Yeah, sounds good.
Even though there's a lot of staff, many of us work part-time. So like I just work like 11 hours a month, it's like really, but we have that cumulative effect of so many minds focusing on little bits of work, so that net effect is enormous in a sense.
I could see how, if you didn't have those working circles in a way to kind of touch base with your colleagues and, reflect on what you've been doing and stuff, it could be really, really isolating, couldn't it? So that feels like a really good solution to that.
And Lynn has a, sorry,
just one more thing. We have introduced like co-working now. So we kind of open up, and whilst we're working, we invite each other to like just co-work as well. So that's also part of reducing the level of isolation, or being like you feeling that they're all on your own.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Charmaine. Lynn has a question, I believe.
I was just going to say that Charmaine's example is a really good example of how we need to be intentional about how we work when we aren't all working in the same place at the same time, and to put those structures in place. And I think a lot of organizations kind of came through the pandemic and hadn't really gone through that wholesale redesigning process, and therefore either just want things to go back to how it was before, or they're just kind of limping along, having made a few adjustments but not really thought about it in as thorough a way as you just explained, Charmaine. Thanks for that.
It does sound really authentic and actually considering the holistic needs. Yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you everybody for sharing. I feel like it's been so many layers to it. Oh, lovely. Well, Jane, is the best way to share a post workshop email? I wanted to send the recording out. Would it be easier for me to give you links and things and for you to share it, or would it be easier for you to send the recording to me and I will send a post email, like a post workshop email?
I don't mind, Becca, whichever works better. We can download the recording and edit it at the beginning and end, and then send it to you, or you can send me. And I can send you the chat as well, because obviously there's a lot of links in there that, I think would be useful to share. We'll also post the recording on our YouTube channel, but But I guess you guys will have platforms as well that you probably want to use. But yeah, whichever works best. Easy either way.
Lovely. I think if you were to send me the recording, that would be brilliant, because I've got everybody's email already pasted into to an email chain, and I've got all the links up. So that would be splendid.
And I've got Natalie's full report that she spoke about, so I'll share that too. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm excited to get dug into it. Oh, lovely. Well, we kind of came to the end of the workshop perfectly in time. Well, 2 minutes, but that was mostly me chatting at you. So
that's being flexible, Becca.
It has been flexible working, indeed. Oh, thank you everyone so much. I need to pop off now. I believe everybody is needing to pop off now. Exactly, yeah. Charmaine. Lovely. Thank you so much. And
thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.